We're gonna go over my top 6 mobility exercises for wrestling, and we're gonna start right now. What's up, everybody? It's Dave Miller from GarageStrength.com, and if this is your first time to the channel and you're interested in improving your mobility, you want to be more explosive, you want to become a better athlete, make sure that you like, you subscribe, and you ring that notification bell so we can help you become a champion. So in the sport of wrestling, mobility is an absolute key. One of the things that always pops into my mind is watching an athlete like Nico Megaludis, who's super flexible, and he would get himself into these crazy positions. Watching him win the NCAA title at Penn State, and he'd almost get into the position of holding a split. Maybe he'd hit a funk out of that position, roll out, and still take an opponent down. And so that's one of the key factors behind mobility for wrestling, is that if you're a mobile wrestler, one, you can get out of precarious situations a lot easier. It makes it a little bit more effective for you to defend a really good shot or to defend an offensive takedown, whatever it might be. But it also enables you as an athlete, as a wrestler, to hold better positions if you're in a tie-up. You're getting heavy on somebody's head, you've got to have lengthened lats. If we have lengthened lats, we have strong lats, and then we can actually apply more force to control our opponent's head. And that helps us move their center of mass, which is going to help us take more advantage of them when they're on the mat and we're on the offensive prowl. And so we've got to think about that from multiple different aspects. Mobility for wrestling is key for defense. It's key for offensive positioning, it's key for controlling your opponent, and it's also key for staying healthy. It's one of those sports where you've got to have really mobile hips. You've got to have a really mobile upper body. Think about kids wrestling in folk style. They're wrestling at the high school level, they're wrestling at the NCAA collegiate level, and now someone's running a bar on them, and their shoulder isn't super mobile. That can lead to some serious problems from a physical, muscular perspective. So not only is it going to help us with performance, it's going to help us maintain our structural integrity during a match, and that's a really key component. So now we're going to go into those top 6 mobility exercises that are going to help you become a better wrestler. Coming at that number 6 spot, this is one of my favorite for every single sport that you can do. This is going to be the Pigeon Stretch. And I actually like to utilize the Pigeon Stretch as an active stretch, as a dynamic stretch, where we would work through 4 to 6 to 8-second eccentrics, try and really open up our hip flexors, open up our hips, open up our lower back, work through that piriformis to try and really loosen our lower back. A lot of wrestlers tend to get really stiff in their lower back, especially based off of their stance. We have a stance where we're going to be a little bit internally rotated. We're going to have a little bit of a round back position depending on your style of wrestling. And that can lead to some lower back pain. It can lead to your glutes shutting off potentially. This is all potential. I like to utilize the Pigeon Stretch before a big lift, and we might do that for 2, 3, 4 sets of anywhere from 2 to 4 reps that are 6 to 8 seconds on each side. That's gonna really help target your hips, target your lower back, and it's gonna help wake everything up before we really get into it. Now, I also recommend that every wrestler should be doing mobility 3 to 4 days a week for 10 to 15 minutes. You hit those stretches for 10 to 15 minutes, now you're gonna feel a lot better, you're gonna recover a little bit more effectively, and Pigeon Stretch is one of those key exercises that I love for wrestling mobility. Now coming at that number 5 and the number 4 spot, I like to sort of pair these exercises together. And that first one is going to be the kneeling thoracic extension. It's a simple lat stretch, right? It's a lat stretch that we can utilize on a bench. It's a lat stretch that we can utilize on a box, but it's going to help wrestlers a ton. We're heavy on the head. We've got that heavy collar tie. Our head is going to be in position to help us move our opponent. Our head might be below where our hand is. And so if our lats are more mobile, we can utilize the strength of our lats in that position on the mat. But we have to have that mobility. And that's why I love utilizing that kneeling thoracic extension on the bench, because it's gonna help open up the lats, but it's also gonna help us when we're starting to throw underhooks and we might have a collar tie that we then pummel out of and lead into another move. And if our lats are more mobile as wrestlers, then we can apply force more effectively. And so I like utilizing that kneeling thoracic extension also because a lot of wrestlers tend to struggle with racking a clean. They might be a little bit stiff in their wrists, or might be a little bit stiff in their lats because they're always internally rotated when they're in their stance. They're sort of taught this, especially in the United States from a young age, to have that little internal rotation and to really try and shimmy around when they're on the mat. And I like to utilize the kneeling thoracic extension with a half kneeling windmill. So the reason why I love utilizing these two together is the half kneeling windmill is going to help us with thoracic rotation, thoracic extension. It's also going to help us wake up our side abs. Now we're going to start to feel that inside of our intercostals. A lot of wrestlers, when they first do the half kneeling windmill, they'll use a kettlebell and they might even start to get a little bit of a spasm in their upper back. But what's cool is then when they get that little spasm and we go back to that kneeling thoracic extension, everything starts to open up a little bit more. It's almost like the half kneeling windmill triggers that kneeling thoracic extension. And then as we start to open up everything with our half kneeling windmill with a little bit of a load, this position drastically improves. And so I like to utilize the half kneeling windmill for anywhere from 4 to 5 sets as a wake up for 3 to 5 reps on each side. And in between, you do the kneeling thoracic extension for anywhere from 10 to 20 seconds. And you might do that for 4 or 5 sets as well. And that's gonna really help wake up that upper back. And you can utilize this, 1, before practice, but 2, even if you're going into the weight room and you're trying to hit some big upper body lifts, these 2 exercises are great for wrestling mobility. Coming at that number 3 spot, we've got the couch stretch. Again, this is one of those movements that every single athlete can benefit from. And a lot of tight guys, a lot of tight wrestlers, when they first start to hit the couch stretch, their whole entire hip, their quad, their lower back, everything just lights up. This is a really difficult movement for individuals who tend to be a bit more tight. Now, the reason why I really like the couch stretch is because it hammers your hips. And one of those big key factors in wrestling is to have extremely strong and mobile hips. So we've got to target our hip area, our hip girdle, and that's where the couch stretch comes into play. And over time, this is also going to help us protect our knee. The health of our knees can be measured based off of how well we can do a couch stretch. So I like to utilize these as well, because if we get somebody who's in on a low single and we're trying to turn out and maybe we're trying to hit a switch or whatever to get out of that position, if we don't have mobile hips, we're not going to get out. We're going to get taken down and we're going to lose the match, right? So if we have a little bit more mobility throughout our hips, not only are we going to be able to apply more force utilizing our hips and being more stable on the mat, but we're also going to be able to get out of those defensive positions more effectively so that we can then score and dominate our opponents. So utilize that couch stretch before wrestling practice, after a big heavy lift with your legs. Before a lift, you can utilize the couch stretch, and I recommend doing 3 sets on each side for 15 to 30 seconds. Now, before we get into the top 2 of my favorite mobility movements for wrestling, if you need help with your mobility on the mat and you want a little program that's going to help you train this more effectively, it's going to hold you accountable so that you can hit this every single week and you can master mobility so that you're in better positions on the mat for next season. Click on the link down below in our description, head over to garagestrength.com, and you can pick up our Mobility for Wrestling program. Finishing off with our top 2 mobility exercises for wrestling, it's gotta be based around the hips, and that's where both of these come into play. The hip 90-90 drill, along with squatting internal rotation from the hips. If we're seated on our butt, rotating those knees back and forth, almost like windshield wipers, and that's going to help with your strength of your hips. It's gonna help open your hips drastically. It's gonna help hit deeper positions when we're in the weight room. It's gonna help us hit deeper positions when we're on the mat. That's gonna help us cut corners a little bit more effectively, changing our levels more effectively. We're gonna utilize less energy if we're more mobile and we can get a little bit deeper from a little easier perspective. Then we put in that squatting internal rotation, and I like to pair these together because now that squatting internal rotation, this reminds me actually of hitting a big switch. Somebody takes a nice high crotch on you and you've got to get nice and deep and you've got to force their head to the outside and then you can hit that little switch position, but you've got to have the mobility in your hips to hit that deep position and to really pressure them with that hip strength. And so we've got to be mobile inside of our entire hip girdle. That's going to help us dealing with any lower back pain. That's also going to help us dealing again with changing our level more effectively from multiple different angles. When we can change levels and create angles on the mat, we're going to get stronger, we're going to be faster, and we're going to take down our opponents a lot easier. So these movements are not going to just help us in the weight room and to help us recover and to help us feel good and nice and limber. It's also going to help us be more effective with executing our actual wrestling moves. And that's a huge key factor. A lot of wrestlers get out on the mat and they're super stiff and they can't handle attacks because they don't have the mobility. So utilize all 6 of these exercises, the hip 90-90 and the squatting internal rotations. I recommend doing before practice, before a weight room workout, after a big weight room workout, at home while you're watching TV or whatever it is that you're doing. Hit these for 3 to 4 sets. You can do 7 on each leg. You can do 7 on each side here. Your hips are gonna open up. You're gonna feel really, really mobile, and that's gonna transfer directly over to the mat. So again, utilize all 6 of these exercises. Do them 3 to 4 days a week. I recommend utilizing them as warm-ups. And if you are really sore after a big, heavy leg day, hit some of these. Open yourself up. Feel better so that you're a little bit more effective when you're getting out onto the mat. Again, if you need help with your mobility for wrestling, click on the description down below, head over to garagestrength.com, pick up your mobility for wrestling program. If you want more content about wrestling-based training, click on this card right here. Until next time, guys, peace.